Okay, my 8th grade friends here for Thursday, April 23. This is going to sound familiar, but as we are moving deeper and deeper into some algebra sorts of things, sometimes things are going to sound familiar and they just keep building on each other. Your directions today, if you saw on the worksheet, were to factor the trinomial. But these are different than the trinomials that we looked at before. First of all, we have 3 examples that we're going to look at here today. And this is the first one, negative x squared plus x equals 20. Now, this was been a little different than the other ones because up until now, we have not had a negative sign here. Okay? But nothing's going to change too much. We're going to put a negative sign there, and then we're going to go ahead and put our parentheses. Now, we have x squared, so with confidence, as we have in the past, we can put x and x. Now, there's a negative sign here, which means now I need to relate to these two numbers somewhat differently. This is a plus 20, but because there's a negative sign, what I'm going to be looking for is two numbers that multiplied together equal a negative 20. I have a negative here, so I'm looking for the opposite here. Okay? So I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied together equal a negative 20. So I'm going to make a note of that so I don't forget. And then added together, instead of a positive 1, they have to equal negative 1. So that's what I need to remember because it's the opposite out here. I'm looking for opposite things here. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied together give me negative 20, and when they're added together, just going to give me a difference of negative 1. So I'm thinking that the best numbers to use for 20 are going to be 5 and 4. Because they're only one away from each other. So I can say with confidence that those are what the two numbers have to be because that's where I'm going to get a difference of negative 1. The question is now, am I going to go negative 5 times 4 or am I going to go negative 4 times 5? That's the question now that I need to relate to. Well, when I add negative 5 plus 4, that gives me a negative 1. So I can be confident that the numbers that I want are minus 5 and plus 4. And I'm ready to move on to number 2, which is this one here. We keep building on each other. Until now, up to this point, we have not had numbers here. It's just been x squared or y squared or z squared, whatever the case may be. We have not had a number here. Okay? But let's deal with the negative first. We're dealing with the negative first. So I'm going to put a negative, and I'm going to set up my parentheses. Now, so I have to think, okay, now, because I have a number here, I've got to think about this to make sure I get the right things here. I've got to think, well, what are the combination of numbers that multiplied together equal 3? Well, the only multiplication with whole numbers that equals 3 is 3 times 1. So I can say with confidence that I'm going to have 3x times x. That's 3 times 1. We know that a 1's there because there's nothing in front of the x. So that's the only way I'm going to get 3x squared, 3x times x. All right, now, once again, there's a negative sign here. So I am looking for two numbers that multiplied together give me a positive 3. Okay? I am looking for two numbers that multiplied together that give me a positive 3. And then I'm also looking for when I add things together that it's going to give me a positive 10. I want you, 8th grade, just to stop and think about what I just said for a second. Because up until this point, I've always said we're looking for two numbers now that because it's a negative sign, we would be looking for two numbers that multiplied together equal a positive 3. And then those same two numbers added together equal a positive 10. If we stop and think about it, folks, that's not going to work. Because the only way that I'm going to get 3 through multiplication is 3 times 1. And 3 plus 1 does not equal 10. So what in the world is going on? Well, this is where now this 3x comes into play. Because remember what we're really doing, even though we haven't talked about it much recently, remember what we're doing is all we're doing is setting up like a FOIL method problem. So I know, okay, I know that this multiplication problem has to be plus 3 plus 1. It has to be. Those are the only two numbers that are going to equal 3. But here's the issue. I need to get a positive 10x. It's my negative sign, so remember this is a positive. So I'm thinking, okay, and this is where this number comes in. I do the outer part of the FOIL method, which is 3x times 1. 3x times 1 gives me 3x. I do the inner part of the FOIL method, 3 times x, which is also 3x. That only gives me a total of 6x, which means this cannot be the right answer. Well, but you might say, well, Mr. Swack, how can that not be the right answer? The only way you get positive 3 by multiplying is by doing 3 and 1. And we're not working with decimals. We're not doing fractions. Well, here's where we have the issue. We know that it has to be 3x and x. We know that's what it has to be because that's the only way I get 3x squared. We know that the numbers have to be 3 and 1 because that's the only way I get a positive 3. Well, what can I do different? Well, instead of 3x plus 3, let's see what happens if I put my 1 here. Instead of x plus 1, let's put my 3 here. Okay? On this assignment, now it's getting a little more difficult, 8th grade, because where you put these numbers, where you put these factors are important. Pretty much until now, it didn't matter. Now it does. It involves an extra level of thought as to what those things need to be. So now let's check. Let's check and see if we end up with a positive 10. Okay, well, 3x times 3, if I do the outer, that gives me 9x. 1 times x, if I do the inner, that just gives me 1x, or x. 9x plus 1x equals 10x. I have here the answer that I want. All right, let's look at the third example and take this to an even higher level. That's what we like. 8th grade math going to a higher level. 6x squared minus x minus 5. All right? I don't have to worry about the negative because it's not a negative 6. So I know I'm just going to set up my parentheses. But I'm working first with a 6x squared. Now, the previous example, we had 3x squared. There was only one way to get 3, and that's 3 times 1. 6 presents us with a little different challenge because I can think of a couple ways that I can get 6. I can do 3 times 2, and I can do 6 times 1. All right, so let's see what happens with 3x and 2x, because that's where I would get 6x squared. 3 times 2 is 6. The x and the x make x squared. Now that I'm doing this, now I'm thinking, okay, I need two numbers that multiplied together equal negative 5. I don't have to worry about switching this sign like I did in the first two because there's no negative outside here. So I'm back to thinking this now has to be a negative 5. Well, the only two numbers that multiplied together to equal 5 are 1 and 5. So I'm either looking at negative 1 times 5 or negative 5 times 1. I'm looking at one of those two options. Okay? So let's take a look at our options and see. We can have some different things here. 3x minus 1, 2x plus 5. Okay? So now we have to think to ourselves, okay, based on where these numbers are, I need to end up with a negative 1. So I got to go back to doing the outer, which is 3x times 5. Well, that's 15x. Negative 1 times 2, which is the inner, that's negative 2. When I combine 15 and negative 2, that's 13, not negative 1. This is not the answer I want. All right, so this is trial and error. I could have 3x plus 5. I can switch their locations and do 2x minus 1. Well, let's see what that does. 3x times a negative 1, if I do the outer, is negative 3x. 5 times 2x, if I do the inner, that's 10x. 10x and negative 3x give me 7x. I need a negative 1, not what I'm looking for. So now I'm looking at, well, could I do negative 5 and 1? Could I do negative 5 and 1? So I'm going to go 3x minus 5 and 2x plus 1. Okay, so let's give it a try. If I do the outer, 3x times 1 is a positive 3. Negative 5 times 2 is a negative 10. A positive 3 and a negative 10 gives me negative 7. I'm after negative 1. That's not going to work, so let's switch their spots. Let's go 3x plus 1, 2x minus 5. Let's see what happens there. 3 times negative 5, negative 15. 1 times 2, positive 2. Negative 15, positive 2 gives me negative 13. I need negative 1. Still not working. Well, so now I'm starting to think I must need a 6 and a 1. Maybe 3 and 2 aren't the right numbers. I know that it has to be one of those combinations to get negative 5, but none of that is working with 3 and 2. So far, none of these are the right answer, which means I must have to use 6x and x. Yes, 8th grade, it's going to be some trial and error. You're going to have to just write some out and hope eventually you get to the right one. Okay? There is only one right answer. Now, I've already established that the only way I can get negative 5 is by negative 1 and positive 5, or a negative 5 and a positive 1. So let's see what happens. All right, let's go here. Negative 5, positive 1. Let's just try what happens. Well, 6 times 1 is 6. Negative 5 times x is negative 5x. When I combine a 6 and a negative 5, that gives me a positive 1. I need a negative 1. So let's switch it. 6x plus 1, x minus 5. 6x times a negative 5, that's negative 30. 1 times x is a positive 1. A negative 30 and a positive 1 is 29. I need negative 1. Oh, so here we go. It's not negative 5 and 1. Must be negative 1 and 5. So let's try 6x minus 1, x plus 5. See what happens. 6, x times 5, that's 30. Negative 1 times x, negative 1x. 30x And a negative 1x gives me a positive 29x. I need a negative 1. Well, let's see. 6x plus 5. X minus 1. We switch the sides. 6x times a negative 1 is a negative 6x. 5 times x is a positive 5x. Ladies and gentlemen, when I combine negative 6x and a positive 5x, negative 6 and positive 5 combines to negative 1. Hallelujah. I have finally gotten the answer that I'm looking for. As you get more confident, 8th grade, you're going to have to start thinking about things mentally and doing some quick multiplication to see if answers are even going to be close. Of course, I purposely drew this video long out so that we didn't get the right answer until the very last one. So you could kind of see what you might have to go through. Some of you are probably going to be able to get here quite quickly because you can do some things very quickly. But you might have to go through, okay? And so you can imagine how long it's going to take when all of a sudden you get a number here that's like 18. And you have 18 times 1. You have 9 times 2. You have 6 times 3. And you have all kinds of ways that you can get those numbers. All right? You're not going to have to do anything more elaborate than this, really, today. But it gives you that kind of idea. I will be available to help you with this Thursday, April the 23rd. All right? We'll talk to you soon. Bye.